My name is Emma, and at 26, I never imagined I'd be a college student sleeping in my car for 3 months while working 2 jobs just to survive. The trust fund my father built for my education mysteriously vanished, while my stepmother and her children lived in comfort. Then, one day, my wealthy Uncle Walter walked into the coffee shop where I worked. He saw me exhausted, thin, and struggling. That moment changed my life forever. But before I share how everything turned around, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to rebuild your life with nothing but determination, hit that like button and subscribe. I grew up in a warm, loving home in a quiet suburb of Boston. My childhood was filled with laughter, security, and traditions that meant the world to me. My father, Jack, owned a successful construction supply company that he built from the ground up. He worked hard, but family always came first. Every Sunday was our day: pancakes in the morning, the park in the afternoon, and movies at night. Those simple rituals shaped my happiest memories. My mother, Catherine, was the heart of our home. She had this rare gift of making everyone feel valued. She volunteered at my school, knew all my friends by name, and never missed a single recital or performance. Her chocolate chip cookies were famous in our neighborhood, and our house was always the place where friends and family gathered. She also loved her garden. Some of my sweetest memories are of planting flowers with her in spring. She'd always say, "Watching things grow teaches patience and gratitude." We lived in a cozy 4-bedroom house with a big backyard. It wasn't extravagant, but it was full of love. My lavender bedroom had a window seat Dad built himself, where I'd curl up for hours with books. Every birthday, my parents decorated the house while I slept, so I'd wake up to balloons and streamers. Those thoughtful gestures made me feel so cherished. Dad's older brother, Walter, was a successful real estate developer. He lived in a mansion across town and traveled constantly for business. But he and Dad were close. They had lunch together every Thursday for years. Walter never had children, so he doted on me as his only niece. For my 10th birthday, he even took our whole family to Disney World. A memory I'll treasure forever. Family holidays were always magical. Thanksgiving at our house. Christmas at Uncle Walter's. Mom would spend days cooking for Thanksgiving, filling the house with amazing smells. And Uncle Walter's Christmas parties. They were like something out of a movie. Giant tree, elegant decorations, gifts for everyone. Those gatherings made me feel part of something bigger, a family with roots and traditions. What I didn't know then was that Dad was quietly securing my future. From the day I was born, he contributed to an education trust fund, often sacrificing his own comfort to make sure it grew. It was enough to cover college and even graduate school if I wanted. He believed education was the one thing no one could ever take away. He dreamed of seeing me graduate, the first in our family to do so. Everything changed when I was 12. My mother began suffering from severe headaches. After weeks of uncertainty, the diagnosis came: an aggressive, inoperable brain tumor. The doctors gave her 6 months. She fought for 8. Those months transformed our home into a place of hushed conversations, medication schedules, and endless doctor visits. Medical bills piled up despite insurance. Dad worked longer hours, but still tried to be there for both of us. I often overheard him on late-night calls, pleading with insurance companies or arranging payment plans with hospitals. The weight on his shoulders was crushing. I grew up fast. While other kids my age were having sleepovers and shopping at the mall, I was helping Mom to the bathroom, managing her medications, and cooking simple meals Dad taught me to make. We became a team united by love, determined to give Mom as much comfort as possible. She passed away one spring morning, just as her beloved garden was beginning to bloom. The day was heartbreakingly beautiful: blue skies, blossoms everywhere. It felt cruel that the world could look so alive when we were broken inside. At the funeral, Uncle Walter stood beside Dad, his hand on his brother's shoulder. Both looked years older than they had just months before. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief. Dad buried himself in work, his eyes often red from tears he shed alone. I would have dinner waiting when he came home, a routine I'd learned during Mom's illness. We didn't talk much about our pain, but some nights we'd sit together, flipping through family photo albums, quietly remembering her. Those evenings, heavy with sorrow yet filled with love, deepened our bond. But I noticed a change in Uncle Walter. The Thursday lunches stopped. He still remembered my birthday, still showed up occasionally, but something had shifted. Later, I learned he and Dad had disagreed about Mom's medical care, creating a distance neither repaired. Still, life went on. Dad and I found a new rhythm. We held on to some of Mom's traditions while creating new ones of our own. I threw myself into school, determined to make them both proud, and even through financial struggles, Dad never stopped adding to my education fund. 2 years later, Dad introduced me to Amelia. He had met her at a business event. She worked in marketing for one of his clients. Amelia was polished, attractive, and seemed genuinely interested in me. She asked about my school, my hobbies, even my friends, with what felt like real curiosity. After months of seeing Dad so withdrawn, it was heartwarming to see him smile again. Amelia had 2 children from a previous marriage. Brandon was 8, athletic and ambitious, with a knack for business like his mother. Zoe was 16, just a year older than me, artistic and quiet. At our very first dinner together, everyone was on their best behavior. Brandon asked Dad about his company, Zoe complimented my necklace, and Amelia made sure no one was left out of the conversation. For the first time, I thought, maybe this could work. Maybe we could become a real family. 6 months later, Dad and Amelia were married in a small ceremony. I was happy for him, though I couldn't ignore how fast everything was moving. Still, I wanted to be supportive. Amelia and her children moved into our house, turning our once quiet home into a lively, crowded place. Brandon took the guest room, while Zoe moved into the office, which Dad converted into a bedroom. At first, the changes seemed harmless. When Dad was around, Amelia was warm, inclusive, always asking about my day, praising my accomplishments, and making me feel part of the family. But the moment he left for work, her tone shifted. Her smile never touched her eyes. Her questions became sharp, almost like interrogations, and she started comparing me unfavorably to Zoe. Brandon and Zoe followed her lead. They weren't openly cruel, but they slowly shut me out, making plans without me, laughing at inside jokes I couldn't share, subtly rearranging the house to suit their preferences. My voice in family matters faded until it hardly mattered at all. One afternoon, I came home from school to find my bedroom half cleared, my things pushed aside for Zoe's art supplies. "Your room has the best light," Amelia said with a thin smile. "You two should share it, it'll help you bond." Later, she told Dad it was something we had agreed on together, and he thought it was a wonderful idea. Not long after, pictures of my mother vanished from the living room. When I asked, Amelia said they'd been carefully stored away. "It's not healthy to dwell on the past, sweetie. We need to focus on our new family now." That Christmas, the ornaments Mom and I had collected never left storage. Our traditions disappeared to replace by Amelia's recipes and her ways of celebrating. Dad was busier than ever. Amelia encouraged him, praising his dedication. "You go provide for us, honey. I'll handle everything at home." And she did our routines to her liking. Money became her favorite topic. I overheard her talking about expenses, Brandon's sports, Zoe's classes, the car Brandon would need for college. Dad always agreed, grateful for her help. Meanwhile, my needs became negotiable. When I asked for money for a school trip, Amelia frowned. "College is expensive, Emma. We should save, not waste money on little extras." She said this, even though Dad had set up an education fund for me. The distance between Dad and me grew wider. Amelia was skilled at stirring up small conflicts, then presenting herself as the peacemaker. "Emma's just at that difficult age," she would tell Dad whenever I disagreed with her. "All teens go through a rebellious phase." She made it sound like I was the problem, and Dad often looked torn, unsure who to believe. Still, I clung to our bond. On Saturdays, I'd wake up early to share breakfast with him before the others stirred. We'd talk about school, his work, and sometimes about Mom. But soon Amelia began scheduling family activities in the mornings, cutting into our time. I didn't fight it. Dad seemed content, maybe even happy. After years of grief, he deserved it. So I kept quiet, focused on school, and told myself that college would bring me the space I needed. About a year into the marriage, cracks began to show in the family business. Dad spent nights buried in paperwork, his expression heavy with worry. Amelia stayed by his side, bringing him coffee, rubbing his shoulders, sitting in on meetings and client dinners, slowly presenting herself as his partner in everything. By 17, I felt like a guest in my own home, my bedroom redecorated to Zoe's taste, no longer felt like mine. Meals revolved around Brandon's games and Zoe's art shows. My achievements were noticed briefly, then overshadowed by theirs. It was obvious who belonged and who didn't. Then came the phone call. It was a Tuesday afternoon during my junior year. The school secretary appeared in my chemistry class, her face pale. In the office, Principal Martinez told me there'd been an accident. Dad had been driving to a client meeting when another driver ran a red light, hitting him head on. He was in critical condition at Boston Memorial Hospital. When I arrived, Amelia was already there with Brandon and Zoe, speaking calmly to the doctors as if she had everything under control. She barely acknowledged me, just a nod before turning back to them. The doctor's words blurred together. Internal bleeding, minimal brain activity. I finally saw him, lying motionless, surrounded by machines. His face was bruised, but his hand was still warm when I held it. I whispered that I loved him. I reminded him of the beach trip we'd taken last summer, when we built sandcastles like we used to when I was little. And through the tears, I made him a promise that I'd make him proud. I don't know if he heard me, but I needed to say the words. Just 3 hours later, he was gone. Just like that, my father, my rock, my last surviving parent left this world. I was 18 years old, and I was completely alone. The hospital waiting room blurred into a sea of faces and voices. Uncle Walter appeared briefly, looking older and more shaken than I remembered. He pulled me into a tight hug and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Emma." But before I could say anything, Amelia intercepted him, pulling him aside for a private conversation. I didn't see him again until the funeral. The days that followed felt surreal. Amelia took control of all the funeral arrangements, rarely asking for my input. The service was held at a church Dad had never attended, led by a minister who had never met him. She chose an expensive casket and elaborate flower arrangements, stepping fully into the role of the devastated widow. During the service, she gave a tearful speech about their short but passionate marriage, making sure she and her children were front and center as the grieving family. I sat in the front row, numb and disconnected. None of it felt like a tribute to the man I knew. There was no mention of his love for jazz, his terrible dad jokes, or his tradition of making heart-shaped pancakes every Valentine's Day. The man being honored felt like a stranger. Uncle Walter was there, but he kept his distance from Amelia. After the service, he quietly slipped me a card. "Call me when things settle down. We need to talk." Before I could respond, Amelia appeared at my side again, steering me toward distant relatives, offering condolences. 3 days later, we met with Dad's lawyer for the reading of the will. That was when I learned Dad had updated it shortly after marrying Amelia. The family business was left to her, with the understanding that one day it would pass to me. The house also went to Amelia, though I was allowed to live there until I finished college. The education trust fund remained intact, but Amelia was named trustee until my 25th birthday. The lawyer explained the trust was large enough to cover an elite university education and even graduate school if I chose that path. I would also receive a separate inheritance at 25, giving me a strong foundation for my adult life. Amelia nodded approvingly through the meeting, occasionally squeezing my hand in what looked like support, but her grip was too tight, too controlling, that as soon as we left the lawyer's office, she started talking about responsible financial management in difficult times. That very evening, she called a family meeting. Brandon and Zoe flanked her on the sofa. United, I sat alone in the armchair that had once been Dad's favorite. "Now that the formalities are behind us, we need to discuss practical arrangements," Amelia said in a businesslike tone. "Emma, you'll be moving into the smaller bedroom upstairs. Brandon needs your room, since he'll be commuting to college and requires the space for his workout equipment and studies." When I protested, reminding her it was my childhood bedroom filled with memories, her expression hardened. "This house belongs to me now, and I will decide how it's used. Your father would want what's best for all of us, not just you." That night, Brandon and Zoe helped their mother move my belongings into the converted attic room. Tiny, sloped ceilings, poor heating. Many of my things never made it upstairs, including keepsakes from my mother and photos of our family before Amelia. Within weeks, the house had been scrubbed of my parents' life together. Family photos were replaced with new ones. Amelia, her children, sometimes my father. It was as if my mother had never existed, and as if my own childhood had been erased. The atmosphere at home grew increasingly hostile. Amelia criticized everything: my appearance, my habits, even my studies. Your father worked himself too, death providing for you, she'd say. The least you can do is show gratitude and respect for this family. Brandon began treating me like an intruder, barging into my room without knocking, taking my things without asking. Zoe wasn't openly cruel, but she aligned with them, reporting my every move as though I lived under constant surveillance. Amelia took full control of my finances, demanding receipts and explanations for everything, from notebooks to clothes. As trustee, I have a fiduciary responsibility, she reminded me often. Your father trusted me to make wise decisions with his money. Basic needs became luxuries. Meanwhile, Brandon got a new car for his commute, and Zoe was sent to an expensive summer art program. By final year of high school became an exercise in endurance. I spent as much time at school as possible joining clubs, study groups, anything, to avoid home. I got a part-time job at a local bookstore, saving every dollar in a private account Amelia didn't know about. I buried myself in studies, determined to win scholarships that would give me independence from her control. The abuse wasn't physical, but her words cut deeper than any blow. She reminded me constantly that I was only in her home because of my father's generosity, that I was a burden she had graciously accepted. She compared me to her children, minimizing every achievement I worked for. But through it all, I held on to one truth: this was temporary. College would be my escape, my chance to finally breathe. I applied to universities near and far, clinging to every acceptance letter as a promise of freedom. When I got into Northeastern University, my first choice school, with one of the best business management programs, I cried as I read the letter alone in my room. For a moment, I could almost feel Dad's hand on my shoulder, hear him whisper, "I knew you could do it, Sammy." But reality struck fast. When I showed Amelia the letter, she barely glanced at it. "Northeastern is very expensive," she said flatly. "I'm not sure your trust can cover that, especially with the business struggling. Maybe you should consider starting at a community college for the first 2 years," she suggested. I stood my ground, reminding her that Dad had specifically saved for my education at a good university. The trust fund was more than enough, even to cover Northeastern's tuition. Amelia reluctantly agreed, but warned me that every expense would be closely monitored. "As trustee, I have to make sure the money lasts all 4 years," she said firmly. "There will be no extravagances." What should have been simple tuition payments quickly turned into exhausting battles. Amelia demanded endless documentation and justification for every fee. Even basic textbooks were questioned as unnecessary. When I needed a laptop for coursework, she insisted I use the family's old desktop instead. Each discussion ended with her reminding me how generous she was being, and how grateful I should be for her careful management of family resources. Still, those first 2 years at Northeastern were a relief compared to life under Amelia's roof. I lived in a dorm, sharing a cramped room with another freshman, Jessica, who became a close friend. That tiny space felt like paradise compared to the cold, hostile environment I had left behind. I poured myself into my studies, joined student organizations, and began shaping a life independent of Amelia's influence. I returned home only when necessary, usually for major holidays, and each visit grew harder than the last. Amelia would spend the first hour listing all the ways I had disappointed her, before bragging about Brandon excelling in business school and Zoe thriving in her art program. My room had been slowly stripped of my belongings, most of them shoved into boxes in the garage. After sophomore year, I secured an internship in Boston that allowed me to stay over the summer. Amelia was displeased, but she couldn't argue with the professional experience it provided. That summer gave me my first real taste of independence, managing a sublet apartment, budgeting on my own, and living without her constant interference. But everything changed during junior year. Amelia called me home for what she described as an important financial discussion. At the dining table, surrounded by spreadsheets, she told me the family business was in trouble. "The economy has hit us hard," she explained. Yet I knew the construction industry was thriving. The difficult decision, she announced, was a drastic cut in my educational funding. Tuition would be covered, but housing, books, and all living expenses were now my responsibility. When I asked to see the trust account statements, her tone hardened. "I don't appreciate your lack of trust, Emma. Your father made me trustee because he knew I'd make responsible decisions. If you can't accept that, maybe you should pay for college entirely on your own." Desperate, I turned to the university's legal aid office. She has no proof, no resources. Your father's paperwork was meticulous. On paper, it looks like legitimate investments that simply didn't perform well. I felt sick. They were stealing my inheritance, the money Dad had set aside for my future. The business trouble was just a cover. That night, lying on the uncomfortable sofa in what used to be my home, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Amelia directly, not yet. I would find a way to support myself completely, document everything, and wait until I had the resources to fight back. The next morning, I lied and told Amelia I had found summer housing back in Boston with friends. I needed to leave before my anger betrayed me. I packed what little I could salvage, said a cold goodbye to the family that never accepted me, and drove back to the city with nothing but survival on my mind. My first night in the car, parked in a Walmart lot on the edge of Boston, was a harsh wake-up call. Every sound startled me. Every passing vehicle felt like a threat. I arranged my few belongings in the back seat, creating a small space to sleep in the reclined driver's seat alone, but determined not to give up. My Honda Civic, a gift from my dad on my 17th birthday before he passed away, had become more than just a carrot, was now my only home. With the fall semester still 2 months away, I needed immediate work and a routine that would let me survive while living unnoticed in my car. My savings from the school year were running low, and I had to keep up appearances so no one would suspect the truth. The very next morning, I signed up for a membership at a 24-hour fitness center. For $30 a month, I gained access to clean showers, restrooms, and a safe place to spend time during bad weather. I learned to arrive earlier, at 5:30 in the morning when the gym was nearly empty. That way, I could shower, change, and prepare for the day without anyone realizing my situation. Finding safe places to park quickly became a skill. I rotated between a Walmart lot, a quiet residential street near the university, and sometimes the mall's parking garage, where security was minimal. I never stayed in one spot for more than 2 nights in a row, just to avoid drawing attention. In emergencies, hospital parking lots worked well. They were always busy and felt safer for a woman alone. Soon, I found a job at a coffee shop near campus that opened at 6 a.m. The early shift matched perfectly with my new schedule, and the manager appreciated my willingness to work when most people wanted to sleep in. The tips were decent, and I had the bonus of free coffee and discounted meals. More importantly, it gave me a place to be during the day. On evenings and weekends, I picked up shifts at a clothing store in the mall. Between both jobs, I was working close to 70 hours a week, too busy to dwell on my reality. Every dollar I earned went straight into a new bank account, but the toll was heavy. My back ached constantly from sleeping in the driver's seat. Boston summers were hot and humid, making the car stifling at night. I cracked the windows for air but never felt entirely safe. Rainstorms were worse, leaving the car damp and musty for days. I created systems for everything. My clothes were sealed in space-saving vacuum bags in the trunk. A small cooler held perishables, refreshed daily with ice from the coffee shop. My laptop and important documents never left my backpack. I did laundry once a week at a laundromat, using that time to read or study. Personal hygiene took creativity. Dry shampoo was a lifesaver on mornings I couldn't make it to the gym, and baby wipes handled quick cleanups. I kept my appearance meticulous, my hair neat, my clothes clean, because looking unkempt could invite questions I couldn't answer. With my limited wardrobe, I rotated outfits carefully so no one would notice I wore the same things repeatedly. The library became my sanctuary. Air-conditioned, quiet, and free, it gave me Wi-Fi, a place to study, and hours of comfort. I arrived when it opened and often stayed until closing. The librarians knew me as a dedicated student, never suspecting that I had nowhere else to go. Finding restrooms was a constant challenge. I mapped out every reliable spot: coffee shops, bookstores, certain fast food restaurants. I quickly learned which places welcomed non-customers and which required me to buy something. Meals were cheap and simple. Breakfast came from the coffee shop, often leftovers that would have been thrown away. Lunch was usually peanut butter sandwiches or energy bars. Dinner was a salad or sandwich from the grocery store, eaten in my car or on a park bench. I grew efficient at living this hidden, nomadic life. But the loneliness was crushing. I spoke to people all day at work, yet couldn't share the truth with anyone. My college friends were gone for the summer, and I avoided their calls rather than lie. Pride and shame kept me silent. I was determined to handle this alone. When fall semester started, I added classes to my already packed schedule. I worked mornings, went straight to lectures, then clocked in for evening shifts. Afterward, I stayed late on campus to study, only returning to my car to sleep. My professors noticed the change. Once a top student, I now looked tired, distracted, and less engaged in discussions. One day, my marketing professor, Dr. Patel, asked me to stay after class. "Emma, is everything all right? Your last paper wasn't your usual standard, and you look exhausted." I forced a smile and made up a story about working extra hours to save for graduate school. I thanked her for her concern, assuring her I could manage. She didn't seem convinced, but didn't press me. Instead, she quietly extended my deadline for the next assignment. That small act of kindness broke me. I cried alone afterward, wishing I could tell her everything. As autumn grew colder, new challenges appeared. I couldn't run the heater all night without burning through gas. So I bought a heavy sleeping bag rated for freezing temperatures and layered my clothes. On the coldest nights, I sometimes splurged on a cheap motel, convincing myself it was necessary to keep my health and sanity intact. I became an expert at using campus resources. The student center had microwaves for meals. The rec building offered lockers for storing belongings. Computer labs gave me everything I needed for assignments. I never missed a free campus event, especially those with food. I always wrapped extra portions to save for later. Through it all, I worked hard to appear normal. To classmates and coworkers, I was just another student juggling a lot, maybe more dedicated than most. No one suspected that when my shifts ended, I returned not to a dorm or an apartment, but to the backseat of my car. I had been living this double life for more than 3 months when fate intervened. One morning, I was working the early shift at the coffee shop. My hair was neatly tied back, my uniform crisp despite being ironed in a gym bathroom. The morning rush had just died down when I heard a familiar voice order a black coffee. I looked up and froze. It was Uncle Walter, older, grayer, but unmistakably him. His brows furrowed as he stared at me in surprise. "Emma, is that you?" I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how thin I'd grown, how tired I looked, despite all my efforts to seem fine. "Yes," I said softly. "Hello, Uncle Walter. It's been a while." He stepped aside to let other customers order, waiting until my coworker could cover for me. When she nodded, he motioned me over to a quiet corner table. My manager, guessing it might be family, waved me off for a quick break. "What are you doing working here?" Walter asked, his tone filled with concern rather than judgment. "I thought you'd be focused on your studies. Amelia said you were doing well at Northeastern." The mention of Amelia's name sent a sharp wave of anger through me. "When do you talk to Amelia?" I asked tightly. "Rarely," he admitted, "just the occasional call about business." "We're not close." He studied my face carefully. "Emma, you look exhausted. Is everything okay?" Maybe it was the genuine concern in his voice, or the months of pretending everything was fine, but something inside me broke. My eyes filled with tears. Quickly, I wiped them away, ashamed to be crying at work. "I get off at 2, I whispered. "Could we talk then?" Walter nodded, his expression grave. "I'll be back. We need to talk." Those next 4 hours dragged on endlessly. When my shift finally ended, Walter was waiting in his sleek luxury sedan, which made my old Honda look even sadder in comparison. He suggested lunch, and I directed him to a small cafe I could actually afford. Over sandwiches, everything came spilling out: the slow takeover of my home after Dad died, Amelia seizing control of my trust fund, my bedroom turned into a gym, overhearing her plans to use my money for the business, and my current reality, living out of my car, juggling 2 jobs while trying to keep up with school. Walter listened silently, his expression darkening with each new detail. When I finally finished, he sat back, hands clenched on the table. "I had no idea," he said finally, his voice tight with anger. "I knew Amelia and I had our differences, but I never imagined she'd do this to Jack's daughter." He shook his head. "I should have stayed more involved after your father passed." "This isn't your fault," I said quickly. Feeling lighter now that the burden was out in the open. Walter reached across the table and took my hand. "This ends today, Emma. No niece of mine is going to live in her car while someone misuses her inheritance. Come with me now." After lunch, he insisted on seeing my car. His face grew grim as he took in my carefully organized but painfully makeshift setup clothes in the trunk. A pillow and blanket laid across the reclined driver's seat, a small cooler on the passenger side. "This is unacceptable," he said firmly. "Pack what you need. You're staying with me tonight." I hesitated, torn between pride and desperate need. "I don't want to be a burden." Walter's expression softened. "Emma, your family, the only family I have left. You could never be a burden. Your father would be heartbroken to see you like this. Please, let me help you." That night, for the first time in months, I slept in a real bed. Walter's house was just as I remembered, a grand estate in one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods. He gave me a guest suite with my own bathroom, fresh towels, and even pajamas. The sheer comfort after months of deprivation was overwhelming. Over breakfast the next morning, Walter laid out his plan. "I've already called my attorney. We're meeting him at 10. I want you to tell him exactly what you told me yesterday, every detail about Amelia's handling of your trust." His attorney, Mr. Lucas Bouzet, sharp-featured man with piercing eyes and the reputation of being one of Boston's toughest litigators, he listened intently, jotting detailed notes, occasionally pausing to clarify. When I finished, he leaned back. "We have strong grounds to petition for Amelia's removal as trustee. Using trust funds for personal or business purposes is a serious breach of fiduciary duty. Courts do not take that lightly." "What about her claims that the investments aren't doing well?" I asked. Mr. Lucas gave a thin smile. "Financial records don't lie, Miss Roberts. If she's been moving money into the business, there will be a trail. My forensic accountant will uncover it." The investigation moved quickly. Mr. Lucas secured a court order for all records tied to my trust and the family business. Walter insisted I focus on my studies, while he and the legal team handled the rest. And he promised me one thing: I had a home with him for as long as I needed. I cut back my work hours to something manageable, keeping only the coffee shop job I truly enjoyed. 2 weeks later, Mr. Lucas called us into his office. Spread across his desk were financial statements, bank records, and business documents. His expression was serious, but there was a hint of relief in his eyes. "We found it," he said without hesitation. Over the past 3 years, Amelia had been systematically draining Emma's trust fund into the family business. The transfers were disguised as investments, but there were no loan agreements, no equity shares, nothing official. The business had been running at a loss for years, and Amelia had been treating the trust as her personal piggy bank. The numbers were staggering. Nearly $200,000 had been taken, leaving less than a quarter of what should have been there for me. On top of that, Amelia had been paying herself an inflated trustee fee and using trust assets to cover personal expenses for herself and her children. "This goes beyond civil violations," Mr. Lucas continued. "There's enough evidence here for criminal charges of fraud and embezzlement. The question is, how do you want to proceed?" Walter looked at me. "This is your decision, Emma. We can pursue criminal charges or focus on recovering your assets through civil action. Either way, Amelia will be removed as trustee immediately." I thought about Amelia, Brandon, and Zoe, how they pushed me out of my own home and stole what was meant for my future. I thought about sleeping in my car through blazing summer heat and freezing autumn nights. I thought about working until my hands cracked and my feet blistered, all while they lived comfortably on the money my father had left for me. "Both," I said firmly. "I want both civil and criminal action. What they did was wrong, and they need to face consequences." The confrontation took place in Mr. Lucas's office. Amelia arrived with her attorney, a nervous-looking man clearly overwhelmed by the situation. She held her composure at first, but as Mr. Lucas methodically presented the evidence, her confidence began to crumble. These were legitimate business investments, she insisted. Jack would have wanted the company preserved for Emma's future. "Then why was there no investment agreement?" Mr. Lucas countered. "Why were the transfers hidden in the trust accounting? And why were personal expenses for Brandon and Zoe being paid from trust assets?" Her attorney whispered frantically in her ear, but she brushed him off. "I was doing what was best for the family. The business needed capital, and the trust was just sitting there." "It wasn't just sitting there," I said, my voice finally steady. "It was my future. That money was meant for my education and security, not to save a failing business or buy Brandon a car." Amelia's eyes narrowed. "You've always been so entitled, Emma, always expecting special treatment because you were Jack's precious daughter. He spoiled you. And this is how you repay him, by attacking the family business he built." "Walter, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. The business was failing because of your mismanagement, Amelia, not because of Emma. Jack built a profitable company that you ran into the ground, and then you stole from his daughter to cover your mistakes. Her expression turned venomous. You were always jealous of Jack's success, of his family. That's why you're turning Emma against me. You couldn't stand to see me carrying on his legacy. My brother and I had our differences, Walter replied calmly. But he would be disgusted by what you've done using his daughter's inheritance to prop up your failures while she sleeps in her car. That is not the legacy Jack intended. For a moment, genuine shock crossed Amelia's face when she learned I had been homeless, but she quickly recovered. If Emma chose to live in her car rather than accept the boundaries of our home, that was her decision. The meeting ended with Mr. Lucas presenting Amelia with two options: agree to a settlement that removed her as trustee, required full repayment with interest, and forced her resignation from the family business or face both civil and criminal court. Her attorney finally pulled her aside for a private discussion. When they returned, Amelia grudgingly agreed to the settlement, but the look in her eyes promised retaliation. The legal process stretched on for weeks, but the outcome was decisive. Amelia was removed as trustee, and Walter was appointed in her place. The court ordered her to repay every dollar she had taken, plus interest. To cover the judgment, she was forced to sell her ownership in the family business, which was then placed under professional management until I was ready to make decisions about its future. Despite the settlement, Amelia still faced criminal charges. The district attorney reviewed Mr. Lucas's evidence and pursued the case independently. Eventually, Amelia accepted a plea deal: probation, community service, and a permanent record that would prevent her from ever handling finances again. Throughout it all, Walter stood by me. Your father was always the responsible one, he told me one night. He never would have let this happen if he were alive. The least I can do is help set things right. As time passed, Walter shared stories about my father that I had never known. He admitted they had grown apart after my mother's death, partly because he had never trusted Amelia. I saw through her immediately, he confessed, but Jack was lonely and vulnerable. When I tried to warn him, it only created distance between us. I regret not fighting harder to stay close to you both. He also revealed he had been diagnosed with cancer the year before my father died. I didn't want to burden him with my illness while he was grieving. Catherine, he said quietly. By the time I was in remission, Amelia had already taken control, and I was pushed out. These conversations helped me understand the painful family dynamics that shaped my life, but they also created a new bond between Walter and me, one that slowly began to heal some of the loss. With my trust fund restored, I was finally able to finish my education without financial fear. I moved into a modest but safe apartment near campus, donated most of the things I had used while homeless, and started to feel secure again. The family business, freed from Amelia's control, began to recover. The professional managers provided regular reports, teaching me about the company my father built so I could one day decide whether to sell it or take an active role. As for Amelia, Brandon, and Zoe, they left the state after the settlement. From what I heard, they were living in reduced circumstances. Amelia's reputation permanently damaged. I felt no joy in their downfall and relief that they were no longer part of my life. But rebuilding myself after months of homelessness and years of abuse wasn't instant. Even with money in the bank and a safe place to live, the psychological scars lingered. I woke up in panic, expecting to find myself back in my car. I hoarded food and kept an emergency bag packed, unable to fully trust that stability would last. Walter noticed and gently suggested therapy. There's no shame in seeking help, he told me. What you went through would leave scars on anyone. With his encouragement, I began seeing Dr. Morales, a therapist who specialized in family trauma and displacement. In those sessions, I learned to process the heavy grief of losing both parents, the betrayal of my stepfamily, and the fear and shame I carried from being homeless. Dr. Morales helped me see that my anxiety and hypervigilance were not weaknesses but normal responses to abnormal circumstances. You survived an incredibly difficult situation, she reminded me. The coping mechanisms that kept you alive may no longer serve you, but they were exactly what you needed at the time. Now we can create new tools for the life you're building. With her guidance and Walter's steady support, I began to heal. I built routines that nourished me instead of draining me. I cut my work hours down to a manageable part-time schedule that fit alongside my studies instead of competing with them. I started cooking in my own kitchen, finding joy in the simple comfort of preparing food in a safe space. As my living situation stabilized, my academic performance improved. Professors who had once worried about me now praised my renewed focus and stronger work. Dr. Patel, who had shown me kindness during my lowest point, became a trusted mentor. He guided my growing interest in business ethics, opening the door to a possible career path. Walter and I also built a new kind of family bond, different from what I had lost, but just as valuable. Every Sunday, we shared dinner together, creating our own tradition. He told me stories about my father's youth and their early business ventures. Through his memories, I began to see who my father was before grief consumed him. The legal resolution with Amelia gave me more than financial restitution, it gave me validation. The courts recognized the wrong that had been done to me. After years of gaslighting and dismissal, that acknowledgement mattered. It told me I had not imagined my suffering, and that justice, in some form, was possible. As my crisis eased, I began volunteering at a youth shelter. I understood the pride, shame, and deep longing for normalcy that many of those young people carried. Without revealing my full story, I could offer real empathy and practical advice. Over time, this volunteer work grew into a part-time job coordinating support for college students experiencing homelessness in an overlooked but significant population. Turning my pain into purpose helped me heal. My academic path also shifted. I added courses in nonprofit management and social entrepreneurship, envisioning a career that could balance financial success with social impact. My senior thesis focused on housing insecurity among college students, highlighting a growing problem and proposing real solutions. Graduation day was a triumph I once thought impossible. Walter sat proudly in the audience as I crossed the stage to receive my diploma with honors. In that moment, I felt my father's presence. His dream for my education had been fulfilled. Despite everything, after graduation, I faced a choice about the family business. With Walter's guidance, I had learned its potential and its challenges. Instead of selling it or stepping immediately into leadership, I chose a middle path. I kept ownership but hired an experienced management team, setting clear ethical standards and employee-centered policies. I took a board position, learning gradually while pursuing my own career in social enterprise. The trust fund, once a source of conflict, was placed under Walter's careful stewardship, with transparent reporting and shared decisions. When the rest of the inheritance transferred to me at 25, I no longer felt fear about managing it. Walter had taught me financial skills my father never had the chance to pass down, preparing me to handle it responsibly. Through this journey, I learned lessons that will shape me forever. I learned that family is not defined only by blood, but by love, loyalty, and presence. Walter became more of a family to me than Amelia ever was. I learned that asking for help is not weakness, it's strength. Accepting guidance from Dr. Morales, support from Walter, and encouragement from friends did not lessen it, made me stronger. But I also learned how insidious emotional abuse can be. It erodes self-worth so quietly that victims often don't see it until the damage is done. Understanding this made me both more compassionate toward others and more protective of my boundaries. Most importantly, I learned resilience isn't about surviving alone, it's about finding ways to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacle. Sometimes that means sleeping in your car and showering at a gym. Sometimes it means accepting a spare bedroom and legal help from a long-lost uncle. Strength doesn't come from one strategy, it comes from refusing to give up. Today, 5 years after Walter found me working at that coffee shop, my life is almost unrecognizable compared to my darkest days. I now have a fulfilling career at a foundation fighting youth homelessness. I own a small but beautiful apartment in a city I love. I share my life with friends who know my full story and love me anyway. And my relationship with Walter has enriched both of our lives beyond measure. The pain of my past has not disappeared completely. I still grieve for my parents. At times, I still feel flashes of anger at Amelia's betrayal, or wake up from nightmares of living in my car. But those echoes no longer control me. They are simply part of the story that shaped me, not the story that defines me. If you are facing your own impossible situation right now, please remember this. Life can change in ways you cannot yet imagine. The person who helps you may be someone you haven't spoken to in years, or someone you haven't even met yet. The strength you need may come from places you don't yet recognize. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything shifted because someone noticed your struggle? Or have you been that person for someone else? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience may be exactly what another viewer needs today. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that even the darkest times can lead to unexpected light. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your story is still being written. The next chapter may be better than you ever imagined.